What's up, guys? This is Danny Hoefelmann, and I am the host of this podcast, The Good in Today. Today, I had on a good friend, Dennis Gable, and he is someone who he has his own podcast. It's called Self to Society, and in my opinion, he puts out a lot of positivity in the world, although he does it through a lot of subjects that are really hard to talk about. And that's kind of the way I presently am doing it. I promise you there's a lot more just fun positivity and good things that are happening in the world coming. That's in the works right now. But for now, I really think these conversations are super important. I do just want to put a disclaimer on today. It went way more about religion than I thought it would. And as someone who is presently really figuring out what I believe, this is really the first time I'm kind of sharing where I'm at in my story. And you might have picked up on it because I have done a little bit with asking people about their version of spirituality. But this is really the first time I've gone in depth. And again, I just want to be open about my journey. If you're someone who thinks that me talking about where I am in faith would drive you away from your faith, and it's not something you want to hear about, please skip this episode. It's just something that I promise neither Dennis or I go into specifics of our religions or previous religions, whatever you want to say. This is really just me sharing my story and Dennis sharing his story in hopes that if there's someone who feels stuck in limbo and they're not feeling like they can go one way or the other, here's what we're kind of going through. So know that you're not alone in that. If you're someone who a family member has left your religion and you're curious why and you're frustrated and you're concerned, I hope that if you listen to this conversation, you get some comfort in just hearing two people talk about it in somewhat of a level head that we can just say, here's our basic reasoning. So again, if that's a kind of conversation that you want to hear and us both talking about, where we are within our spiritual journeys, I hope that you listen and I'm grateful that you do. If it's not, again, I will come back to more about mental health and tips to be, a happier version of yourself. But this episode has that sprinkled in, but it definitely has way more of a religious theme. So if you do decide to listen to it, I appreciate the heck out of you. I hope you get some good value out of it, and I hope that it helps you in whatever you're looking for. What's up, guys? This is Danny Hoefelmann. I'm the host of this podcast, The Good in Today. Today, I have my good friend Dennis Gable sitting down with me. He is the host of another podcast called Self to Society. And basically today, I brought him in because he's someone that I look up to as a really rad example. And Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Basically, one of the things I admire most about you is the fact that you really are just kind of raw, when things are going, you don't pretend everything's great. You're able to put it out there, but you put things out there in a way that doesn't say pity me. It just says this is what I've gone through. If I can get through this, you can too. And you talk about things from your past. And that's really what I want to be able to dive into with you is just this podcast. I promise people there will be more good and not as heavy of conversations. I've had this conversation a couple times, realizing that I'm it's called The Good in Today, but we've had deep, heavy, emotional kind of conversations so far, and this one will probably be more along those lines. But I promise more happy, fun stuff is coming too.
There is a lot of good in the heavy.
Well, I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
But I promise we'll live up to the name more on that side too. Anyway, Dennis, could you give people a little background on who you are, what you do, and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I don't know that we have enough time on the whole podcast for that.
I'll cut you off. No worries.
Yeah, I'm a creative guy. I function as, kind of a brand strategist in terms of how I think and how I approach life and work and business. In my podcast, Self to Society, it, like you're saying, is really just kind of a raw, uncut version of my experience. I'm giving myself to society in the way that I think best suits me and hopefully best serves everybody else. My story is long and sort of complicated. I guess the simple version is that I didn't come from a clean, simple, put-together family. Both my parents were addicts. Divorced when I was young. Both my parents are actually dead now. My mom died in 2008. My dad died in 2009. I was married and divorced. I have 2 kids, one I adopted and one I made, So it's like to travel all the way through my story. I feel really grateful that for some reason I had the fight to get to where I am, mentally and emotionally and spiritually even, while that is still a question. I've had the fight to get here, and I don't really know why, which is the reason that I share so much of my story. It's the reason that I do it raw and uncut. It's also the reason why I think these conversations, heavy, raw, emotional, are actually part of the good in today.
For sure.
So
I appreciate
be encouraged by that.
I appreciate that. And one thing that so the way I met Dennis is, I think I've said it before, but like the guy who started the company of the studio we're sitting in, Renzer Media, this is the company I'm helping to build right now. And Skylar and I started a podcast for him a couple years ago. I basically met Dennis at an event, and I just knew you as a guy who was just a rad graphic designer. One of your stickers is still on my shelf, and my kids still think that it's me because it's a dude with a hat and a beard, and that's just like, it's my favorite sticker. But anyway, he came on Skylar's podcast just to talk about, kind of entrepreneurship, graphic design, things like that. And it went down a road a little bit of mental health, but more so just there was a couple sayings that you had when you were on that. One was, no matter where you are, no matter how far along you are in your journey, like someone wishes they were where you are. Mm-hmm. And I think the other really big takeaway that I took from that was making sure that you could always help people know that they're not alone. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, that's part of the reason that this exists, is helping people know that even when you're going through hard things, like, you're not alone. And it doesn't make it easier necessarily, but know that there are other people who have made it through it. You can make it through it, and you can also find people to talk to that can help you and at least let you release it and get it out.
Of course.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like some of the work that you've done on that side and like kind of how you came to that conclusion, like that psychology on your life there?
Yeah, man. I think what's interesting about where I am today is that most of how I ended up here started in the framework of the church. I don't have to say which church, just in general,
Yeah.
And those are roles that I carried for a long time. I have been a pastor before. I've preached an ungodly amount of times, and so being a part of that system, taking a look at my own life, or what's a better way to say that? I don't know, examining my character.
Yeah.
It became something that I was doing, but I wasn't necessarily doing it for me. I was doing it so that I didn't get shunned or kicked out or told that I wasn't good enough or called a heretic or any of the other things that I've been called in my life.
Yeah.
So when it was probably, I don't know how many years ago now, some amount of years ago, I started to do it for me. I stopped doing the self-examination for anybody else and tried really hard to do it for me. And what I learned is that it will never end. The process.
When you say the self-examination from someone else, you just mean like stop worrying about the judgment of others? Is that just okay?
Yeah, I stopped examining myself simply to make sure that I wasn't publicly doing something wrong, right? That somebody could see and hold against me.
Gotcha.
But I started to really actually examine my character as opposed to my behavior. And I started to examine my intentionality. And I started to examine what parts of me were acting out and what parts of me maybe were natural and what parts were healing. And in the exploration of all of those things, I have discovered a couple things. One is that this journey will never end. The journey of self-discovery, mental health, emotional health, spiritual wonder will never end. And that, for some people, sounds overwhelming. For me, it's a great joy. Because what I know now is that regardless of how I got here, I get to keep getting there.
Yeah.
So the journey for me, and I think I already answered your question. Sorry that I'm going over the question a little bit. How I got onto this journey was a history in the church. Why I'm here still today is because I don't want to be a shithead. Like, there's a saying that has become relatively popular. There's a lot of sayings that have become popular because of memes and social media. But one of them is the way that somebody treats their server or bartender says an enormous amount about who they are. Yeah. And what I started to see about myself is that while I will always have flaws, and I have made some really terrible decisions, and I have hurt people in very, very massive ways. I am really confident in who I am generally. That the word generally, though, is the thing that drives me. I want to be kind-hearted, and I'm not soft emotionally. Like, I have very little empathy. I have a lot of compassion, but I don't have a lot of empathy, and I'm not very patient with some things. I'm more inclined to just say, that doesn't fit in my world. I'm going to discard it, and that's probably okay. But in terms of handling people, I want to do it with open hands, with care. And, honestly, it came out of a place of not needing to impress anybody anymore.
Yeah. Well, I want to go, so I'll just preface it with this, and that, like, anyone listening, like, know that I probably am going to bring up more stuff about spirituality for this first little while, because it's something that I'm personally going through my own things and learning, and I just want to make sure that I never want to say anything negative about a specific church. More so, it's just all about my belief, and basically being able to say, like, I don't have any hard feelings about any specific churches. More so, just, I think a lot of people don't feel like they're allowed to just say, I just don't believe in it anymore. Mm-hmm. And as you kind of talked about, like, wanting to know that people around you, like, being worried about their judgment if you weren't living up to X standard, mm-hmm. as someone who also came up in more of a very, like, strict religion, and especially, like, in a town that's very small where most people are that religion, mm-hmm. it stands out when you're not.
Sure.
And I feel like there's one thing that I really want people to know, kind of going back to that, like, you're not alone thing, is if you're in your religion and that works for you, like, freaking great. Like, that's awesome. Like, I have zero judgment towards that. But I know there are a lot of people who are kind of stuck in limbo, mm-hmm. and they wind up feeling that, like, they can't even admit that they have these feelings for fear of societal pressure, maybe fear of their spouse, and like it wrecking a marriage. I know that was a thing for me as I've kind of been navigating this over the last year or so. It took me like 2 years to be able to tell my wife, like, hey, I don't think I believe in our church anymore. And it was literally the scariest moment of my life, because it's definitely not doctrine, but it's very much culture, mm-hmm. for people to say, like, you need to get a divorce because you don't want to get dragged down too. And that was something that it was genuinely my biggest fear. And as I've been very open and patient in this with my wife, like, I realized that I knew it was going to take time, and there was going to be, like, stages to it, mm-hmm. where basically she was allowed to be angry, she was allowed to be confused, she was allowed to be scared, I was allowed to be all those same things, mm-hmm. But I want to talk a little bit more about kind of just helping people who kind of feel stuck in that limbo. Yeah. Because I know you've done a lot with your podcast, mm-hmm. And you've done a lot out of it too, I'm sure. But being able to talk about kind of like deconstruction of, like, having this firm foundation, this firm belief, mm-hmm. and then having it, like, kind of almost crumble, and then being able to say, like, I can say right now, like, I'm at a place where I'm like, I am completely content with saying I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think that only happened because I've done a ton of work personally to get to that point, and I allowed myself to get there, and I allowed myself to say, like, there's no timeline, like, just go. I've heard enough of your story to know that you were, like, you came from a hard, growing up. Mm-hmm. I think you said your grandma kind of kept you in the church. Yeah. And then from there, like, you were rebellious, and then you were a lead singer of a band. Like, you were all these things. Yeah. And then you were a preacher, and now you're kind of finding your way past everything.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that spiritual journey? Like, that is something I'm incredibly curious about.
Yeah, of course. One thing that I'd like to preface this with is to hear people talk about the rewiring of their spiritual journey, their spiritual makeup, means that we've been thinking about it for a really long time. So anybody listening or watching or whatever they do, the misnomer that I don't want is for people to feel the pressure that they have to make decisions right now. Take your time. Examine your heart closely, right? What happened with me is I did have a relatively difficult upbringing, surrounded by a lot of, interesting things. As I grew into myself, I realized that I have a halfway decent personality, and I should probably use that. I got into the church late teens. That parlayed me into youth work, which I used to learn how to speak publicly. I learned how to craft messages. I learned how to preach. I learned how to do all of those things. And so then I just was on this long-term path to get paid to be a public speaker, but just do it from one stage all the time. And when I really began to be honest with myself, that there were parts that it felt like there were more parts of me, that were using the church to build my own platform as opposed to sacrificing my soul for the greater good of the church body. Yeah, I had to just start asking more questions. And the way, I'm no longer married, and that came with its own set of trouble. I had confessed to and told my ex that the worst thing I did, which I did some pretty bad things, the worst thing I did was not tell her when I wanted to be done. If I would have just been honest with how I was feeling about our marriage, how I felt about her, how I thought she felt about me, and I would have just walked away then, I would have saved a ton of catastrophe. But what I was so afraid of is how people were going to view me, specifically from the basis of a religious standpoint. Because truthfully, there wasn't anything bad enough to justify a divorce. We just weren't that great for one another. In reality, that's a pretty good reason. Yeah. When you're being faced with people whose judgment and opinion is, like you said, if somebody chooses to not be, divorce them. Or there's like such hard lines that I stayed. And in my staying, I ended up being unfaithful and completely destroyed myself. I had to kill so many parts of who I am to do some of the terrible things that I was doing. So in my, quote, deconstruction, I leveled everything. It was like you find an old abandoned building and you want the lot that it's on and not the building. I want the lot, right? Like I want my heart and my soul to have whatever I want to build on it, but I had to level everything else. And so I did. I bulldozed all of my faith. I stopped praying. I stopped using the word God. I did not read scriptures. I did not really engage in conversations about church or religion because they didn't interest me. My vernacular has changed greatly in how I identify certain things. I've brought myself into a place where I don't have to call it what I used to for me to have some experience with it. And, I guess that's what I mean by saying I want the lot that this building was on, but I just had to tear the building down. For me, I don't know that I've particularly ever questioned certain elements of my religion in the grandiose kind of idea. A lot of vernacular that I hated, a lot of the way that we treated other people I didn't like, a lot of the ways that there was manipulation and control and power and, the pressure to be or not to be. That's most of what I despised. And so I tore that building down. And, me tearing that building down was hard for a lot of people. was hard for my kids. Like I went through a season where I couldn't pray with my kids before bed. And I would have to, my daughter's 11, my son's 5. My son didn't care so much. My daughter, I know that it bothered her at first because she would ask me to pray and I would say, love, I don't right now.
When were you actually open with your kids, like in the process? Was it early on or was that?
No, early on is, amidst me being unfaithful, and it was in the middle of so many other things that it's not until the dust settles from tearing that building down that you really can see clearly. I mean, to continue to paint that analogy, if you just swung through and knocked a building over, the dust and debris that would be in the air, it all has to settle. And it will take sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years for that to settle, but it has to settle. And the thing that I encourage people to do is not tear the whole building down if they don't need to. I needed to. But, I walk with a sense of wonder now. A sense of like, what if this works this way instead? And what if it means this instead of that? And my heart is much lighter about faith and spirituality and things than it used to be. I used to be much more rigid, even in my grace and even in my inclusivity. I was still rigid.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's something that I've kind of just, not that I wasn't accepting of people before, but I think for me, a lot of me kind of looking at what I believe and what I didn't believe basically came from always kind of feeling like I was taught or told that you could only feel the Spirit if you're like in alignment with X kind of thing. And then I would go out and do these other things that were completely not that. And I don't mean anything like crazy, but I mean like going to the mountains and like, not that that isn't in alignment with it, but like, it's just one of those things where you're like, when you're out in nature, you feel these feelings. When you're doing a service project, you feel these feelings. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean it comes from the church. It just means like you're doing good things. You're being a good person. Good on you, you know? And like one of my experiences was like going to a Tony Robbins event. And it was just kind of that idea that like, if you're dropping F-bombs and you're doing all these things, like there's no way the Spirit can be there. Well, I can tell you from being in a room with 5,000 people that all have one specific intention, even though there was constant F-bombs and everything else going, you put that many people in one spot and say like, we're here with the intention to all be better people. It's a pretty powerful freaking feeling.
Super.
And I think that was just kind of one of my things as I looked into more personal development and different things where I basically just had to say like, I don't think this is the only place I have these feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel so much more inspired to do these amazing things when I'm doing this or listening to these, or at least as much as when I'm over here.
Right.
And it's not to say that this is not right. It's just to say that it's not the only right. Like there's more than one right way to do it. And I think that was just kind of like the beginning for me. And in terms of you talking about having to tear down the building and let the dust settle. And when I first told my wife, you know, I never wanted to read anything negative about our religion. Like it was all anti, and I never dove into anything at all. And I still I really just make my decision based off of how I feel and what I think. But I've looked into more stuff since then. But I didn't even do any of that until I had told my wife, because it was like, if I go on this trajectory and I wind up way over here and she's still here, this is not going to be good for our marriage. And like, I wanted her to be included from the beginning of like, hey, here's where I am. Here's where I feel. Like, we had a few weeks of like, this is really rough. And we were still kind of like not on the same page. And then it came back to, all right, we're still not on the same page, but we're understanding of why we're each at where we are, kind of thing. And for me, I asked her, I was like, hey, do you care if I just talk to some of my friends who I know have left the church? Because I want to hear their experiences. I want to hear, you know, again, like this is me trying to figure out, I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone, but I want to be able to go, all right, you went through this and you navigated this with your spouse. How did that work?
Right.
And I wanted to go, and I had a few people that I reached out to, and some of them it was really helpful. And then some of them, like, I'm also not the person who, even though I know long term, I've decided I'm not going to be a part of it long term. Like, I still go with my family every week. Like, they're active. Like, they want to be there. I will totally support you. You know, like, I'm good with that. I really am comfortable. I still participate. I still will read if they need someone to read. So, like, I really am very comfortable in that. But I talked to a few people that were just like, oh, the moment, like, this isn't true and this isn't true. Like, the whole thing's just out the window. And I was like, kind of, because my brain does work that way.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, there are some foundational things that, like, well, because I don't believe in that, it's not that I don't believe some of these things are true, and it's not that I don't believe that many churches have built amazing organizations that do amazing things for people.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of churches are freaking amazing. Like, the people within my church, 99% of them are incredible people with amazing intentions who would never do anything to hurt anyone. And, like, I just don't believe in the doctrine. Like, that was just my problem. It's like, it should be okay to say, I just don't believe in it. And I believe in lots of things now. And like you said, like, being able to kind of have that, I walk in wonder, like, what's possible? What if this means this? And for me, it was like the first 3 to 6 months-ish, it's just like, don't make any decisions. Don't do anything. Like, just be there, learn what you want to learn, like, kind of figure out why you're thinking what you're thinking. And then these last 6 months there's been nothing that I've gone and researched. Like, I don't care. It's just me and my wife talking at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all that matters to me. I make my own personal decisions. She makes hers. We talk about them. And we both know that, like, our number one goal is, like, keep the family strong. Because that's what I have. Like, we have each other. That's literally my entire foundation is built around that right now.
Right.
And that's the one thing I wanted to make sure just stayed there.
Well, let me encourage you in something that I hope speaks to you deeply. There's so much garbage about the role that men have to play in religious homes for their spouse. There's a very patriarchal sense of lead the woman spiritually, right? Like, be the spiritual leader of your home. What is often suggested, or at least was in my experience, is what that kind of meant is like caveman knock her over the head and drag her by the hair wherever you're trying to take her. And what I hope you feel super encouraged in your journey with your wife is the most masculine thing that you can do is give your wife the space to make some decisions for herself. And one of the most gracious things that she can do is to not hold you in contempt for having a heart of wonder, right?
Yeah.
And so I say that to encourage both of you that the grace that she has shown you is stuff that makes men feel alive. And you're leading her in a way that really is beautiful by having open hands and allowing for grace, allowing for questions and that sort of thing. So I wanted to encourage you there in that part of your story, because there aren't many people who will buy into non-binary spiritual leadership in a home.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really cool that you guys are working through that and able to do that. You know, one of the interesting things about faith or church and religion to me is I will never forget. It was like Super Bowl Sunday. I don't even remember what church I was in, but the pastor said, you know, the Super Bowl's today and that's cool. Attendance is down. But if you guys, you know, loved God like you love your football team, this church would be full anyway. And while that is ridiculous to say in a public setting, part of the reason that people choose to love their football team or their favorite band or some other thing and react and respond about it with such emotional fervor is because they're not forced to do it. If if the church really was an open revolving door of faith and hope and love and generosity, people, I think, would be more inclined to show up and scream their ass off when they hear something that speaks to them. And, that I'm a tad of a rebel, just a slight rebel
bit there.
And so I have a heck of a time with anybody telling me that I have to do anything. I don't even like setting an alarm clock because my phone is now telling me what to do. Like I'm that rebellious, And so the idea that we become held captive into whatever faith or religion or practice we choose will inevitably kill the excitement for us. And, I can tell you with full certainty that I've been at a rock and roll concert pretty drunk and had I'll never forget this concert. I was watching Thrice in San Diego. I was not sober. And I had one of the most spiritually invigorating experiences of my entire life. Like everything that people talk about feeling in the spirit, I felt it 10 times what I had felt in thousands of church services. And I will never forget that experience that I had. And, the movement or activation of what I think people generally would call the spirit, which, to break it maybe into a layman's term would be the spiritual force that you can't see. The spiritual thing that ties people together and you feel weird things and you don't know why. Like that's how I'll identify that. It's as present as the sun. Yeah. The sun never goes away. It just slides behind. It never goes away. And so, our ability to feel and experience things that are spiritual is never ending. It doesn't have to have a place. It doesn't have to have an alignment even. You just have to show up.
Yeah. And along the lines of you saying like the have to part of it, I think one thing that kind of gets me in every religion I've come across, is the ultimate sin is always to deny it, which means once you're a part of it, if you leave it, you're damned. That's the ultimate sin. I'm like, well, that's not what's the word where you have agency. Mm-hmm. That's an ultimatum. That's all it is to me.
Right.
And that's just, maybe that's not right, but that's the way my brain processes it. And one thing I want to do is, and this is not like a super active mission. I don't want to always talk about spirituality. That's not the purpose of this podcast, but it's something that I'm going through and I'm very interested in. And if it's something that people want to follow along on, I'm open about it. Mm-hmm. But one thing within religious culture that I wish I could help people at least do more of is just anytime a new person shows up to your church, you are stoked for them because they're finding your church, the true church. Anytime someone within your church leaves, it's like, how could they? I don't understand.
Right.
But in reality, I'm like, I wish we could just celebrate more people for having the desire to figure out what they have faith in and what they believe in.
Yeah.
And I think if we tweaked that, and instead of always assuming the worst and assuming, well, they just want to sin or they just want to do this or they're too lazy to fulfill the requirements, and allow them to be like, I just don't believe in this, but I want to pursue spirituality. I'm going to go over here for a little while. And I think that's kind of my thing is the biggest thing for me that I've tried to help my family understand is this is not me abandoning spirituality. This is truly me going after figuring out what I really believe spirituality is.
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't know, that's me trying to figure out my thoughts on the culture and how we can have that message to just be open about it.
Yeah. The journey to wonder and doubt is the most beautiful spiritual journey that any human can go on. The statement, the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty. There's no faith in certainty. When you can look at a topic or a situation and say, I know without a shadow of a doubt that this very invisible, very cosmically questionable incident in fact is 100% true to the way that it is written in some book somewhere is the most opposite thing from faith. I want to operate in a place of faith. In order to do that, I have to ask a lot of questions. You know, the idea of what you're saying is kind of my revolving door theory. It's like if we could just allow people to be open, and imagine a restaurant, right? You walk into a restaurant and the owner of the restaurant goes, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're here." And you finish your meal and you leave and he curses you on the way out, assuming that you probably will eat at another restaurant. Like that's ludicrous. It's absurd to think that a business owner would do that. And yet business owners do it every Sunday or Wednesday or Tuesday or whatever day they do their thing. And the pessimistic part of me doesn't believe that there's any real hope outside of capitalism for the church as a whole. I do think there are micro or acute organizations that are changing their DNA, right? They're functioning in a different way, in a different space. But damn, we live in America. And it's like we have to rent these really big rooms or buildings to put all the people in. And in order to keep the people in, we got to pay the rent. In order to pay the rent, the people have to be there to give the money. And in order for people to give the money, they got to be there. And in order for people to have the money, they got to make the money. And so it's like it is in fact a never-ending cycle of capitalism that will not allow for a revolving door. And there are churches that are revolving, that are open-handed, come or go as you please, but they're small. Yeah. They're, 40, 50, 60 people, maybe 100 people. But in that sort of intimate environment, you'll be seen and you'll be heard maybe, and you may not want to leave. And so I don't think it's about size. I didn't mean to, size matters. I didn't mean to make it about the size of the church, because I don't, there are great people in all sorts of churches and houses and denominations and faith practices and that sort of thing. But, I don't currently attend a church because of that fact. Because I don't want to show up once to feel like I have to show up again. And, anytime that I go to a church, it's like, "Oh, hey, so glad you're here." I'm like, yeah, it's nice to meet you.
Yes.
And that's just, I would much rather, this is very church fulfilling to me. This is very spiritually fulfilling to me. Laying on the floor meditating earlier is very fulfilling to my soul. It speaks to me in a way. Spending 10 minutes praying in the shower. Like, my prayer life, I don't use male pronouns anymore. I don't call God Father. I can still address God as God. Yeah. But the identity there is very different for me. God could be all things, so I'm not going to address it as male, especially if I'm having an emotion or a feeling or an experience that needs feminine love. If I need a maternal figure, I don't have a mom. So if I need a maternal love and I'm approaching the masculine God, the framework of my brain isn't right for me to be seeking what it is I want to find. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, when earlier I said my vernacular's changed, like that's part of it, is I call God just very simply God, no longer Father or Him, or Lord even is a hard word for me at the moment. In the human experience figure or the human example figure, like I might say Jesus if I'm talking about him. I might also say Buddha. I might also say Martin Luther King Jr. You know what I mean?
Literally. So, I mean, I don't know. Because, again, I don't want to go down, out of respect for people that I still need to talk to about things, like I've tried not to go down like certain rabbit holes. But, I mean, that's kind of my thing, is even when it comes to, if you don't believe in this, like, do you believe in Jesus? And I'm like, I don't know. And I wish more people were okay to take I don't know without then trying to like teach you. And I'm like, no. I've been in a church literally my whole life. Like I understand, But when I say I don't know, it's kind of the way you're saying it is, do I believe in him the way that I've always been taught? Probably not. Do I believe that there was a dude who did those things and was an amazing guy enough that a bunch of different people from a bunch of different lands and religions all wrote about a very similar character? Yeah, there's probably a really good dude. And again, it could be the equivalent to a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or modern day philosophers and people who just got their message out there. And in reality, to me, like when it comes to all of the religion and spirituality and all this stuff, if I can look at you and regardless of what you're doing, you could attend a different church every week. If your goal in life to me is to become a better person and to treat other people well, I'm fine with you. Mm-hmm. Like I have no problems at all. And like, I think that's just kind of the place that I'm getting to and trying to help other people get to. Yeah. Is like, just because someone leaves, they're not bad. And just because they don't know if they have faith.
Well, how many times
that's okay.
I mean, I can't tell you the amount of times in some of my legalism that I would say things like, well, even good people end up in hell. Because it wasn't about being good.
Yeah.
It was about acceptance of the one thing. And if you didn't accept the one thing, nothing else mattered. Like it was all flung off the table. And that is completely ludicrous to me now. I think there was a time and a place where I needed the faith that I had. I also believe probably for me that I'm at a place mentally and spiritually of growth. This is going to sound terrible. Because what it was starting to sound like is that I've elevated above faith. That's not what I'm saying. But I have to operate with it differently. It's like going to the gym. You don't always do the same exercises or the same movements or the same weight forever. You have to do different things because you're growing and you're changing and we're evolving, even if just on a biological level. Our genes are resetting, our taste buds change, our hair goes gray. You know what I mean? Like
you're a little ahead of me there.
Yeah,
it looks good.
Thanks. Well, I mean, we're changing we're evolving biologically. You can call it change, call it evolve, call it whatever you want. But I think there's space and freedom for us to do it differently, even if that's for a season. I was having a conversation literally the other night, and the person I was talking to, we were having a very similar dialogue, and I said Martin Luther King, and he was not having it. And he was like, this is absurd. And I was like, it's not absurd.
For putting them on the same level, you mean?
Yeah. And I said, what's different about Jesus? Well, he died and rose out of the grave. Cool. Assuming that is true, let's just say that, and this was my take, let's just say that maybe for those people in that time, in that place, they needed somebody to come out of the grave. And for a generation in America, they needed a man to be willing to stand up and say, I have a dream and this is what it is and I'm going to die for it. Right? And maybe it's the experience of Gandhi for that culture and that time and that place. And maybe the non-binary God believes in all of humanity enough to give each of them their own example of hope and faith and grace and compassion and joy and love and freedom. That's very much my doctrine at the moment, is that the God that would create all humans is in tune enough with the differences of all of the humans to know that one story wouldn't satisfy everybody. One type of food wouldn't satisfy everybody. One type of landscape wouldn't satisfy everybody. It's why the world looks different. It's why there's beaches and there's deserts. It's why there's mountains and there's valleys, because it can't all look the same. We can't all be the same. There's tall people, there's short people, there's blonde people, there's brunette people. The differences in all of human existence, there's so many differences around us. And yet we hold so tightly to the one thing that has to be the binary thread for all humans ever, forever. That's like the most non-God approach to humanity of all the rest of humanity, and where I got to was either what I'm thinking is more along the lines of a truth that I can buy into, or there really is no spiritual being, and there just is a lot of energy from the sun, and we feel it and we call it spiritual. And at one point, humans started to exist, and I don't believe that, and I don't have an answer there. But I had to get myself to, it's got to be one gracious extreme or one really weird event that caused humans to be created or exist or whatever. But that, that in what you're saying is like, and I know that it's hard for you because it's still relatively fresh, especially culturally for you. There, for the people listening and watching, like, there is no harm in saying I don't know, and allowing I don't know to take you down whatever thread it needs to take you down. So long as I don't know doesn't make you treat people terribly. And for me, it did. For me, I don't know. And so maybe that's hypocritical to say. I don't know.
So when you say that, though, when you first hit I don't know, is that a place of anger and being annoyed at the world, and that's why it took you down a night? Like, how do you go from pastor dude to like, I'm going this way?
Honestly, and maybe those aren't so equivalently aligned.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm trying to make it worse on myself than it was. Really, I just started saying I don't know, and nobody was with me, or the people that were with me weren't super close. And
is that just, I don't know, turned into loneliness?
I don't know, turned into F it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people reach that.
That's what I don't know turned into for me. I don't know turned into, well, okay, I guess I'll really do whatever I want, which is a really scary place to be. Like, I was having a conversation today, actually, with some friends of mine who are pastors of a church in Peoria. And one of them said, desire is the most honest human experience. And I was like, damn, that's some truth. There's some true truth right there. Like, there's nothing more real to a human than what they desire. Ooh. So if you get down, if people get to a place where they say, I'm going to do anything I want or anything I desire, like I have a podcast episode called I'll Do What I Want. The problem is that I want to do good. So the hearing that is people going, oh, he just wants to rebel. No. I want to go drink beers or whiskey with people who are hurting. I want to run a podcast that I hope helps people. I want to be really, really kind when I'm in public to servers, bartenders, people that work at the gas station, a single mom with 7 kids screaming and yelling, and she can't quite get to the door to open it. But I've also been in places where I want only to serve me. That's the scary place to be, is if the only person that you care to serve is you, it will go ugly.
How do you weave that in with the absolute need for the self-care side? Like, how do you... I understand the negative side where you're just saying, like, I'm saying F it, and, like, anything that I have ever wanted to do, like, I'm just going to do it, and I don't care who it affects along the way. Like, I get that.
Yeah.
How have you gone from that? Like, have you been able to really allow yourself to, like, no, I am going to focus on me now. I'm just going to do it in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, in some way, I mean, I don't know how explicit I need to be, but in some ways, like, I need to care more about me than being satisfied sexually. I need to care more about my heart than my pants, right? And so, as one maybe relatively vague example, it is hard to turn your time and energy to yourself and give yourself the grace and freedom to say, I deserve this time, and that's okay. And one thing that I've recognized about myself is that I'm a relatively caring human, and I didn't care about myself enough. In all of the caring that I've done, and all of the service that I've done, and all of the motivating and all of the things that I've done good for other people, I haven't cared enough about myself to do them for me. I wanted somebody else to show up and do them for me. And that's something that I have flipped on its head, is that I really do believe the statement that you can't love somebody really until you love yourself. There has to be an element of self-love and self-protection, I have to do this for me. And when people get there, they can do things for other people in a way that will bring so much more joy and satisfaction and honor to the people they're serving. And so, for me, as little things is spending 10, 15 minutes sitting down in the shower. Something that I do almost every day is I take 15 minutes. I shower every morning. I have to. Part of my thing. I shower and then I sit down. And I just let the water hit me, and sometimes I think, and sometimes I cry, and sometimes I pray, and sometimes I pray in tongues, and I just babble, and I don't know what I'm saying. And sometimes I talk to myself as if I'm my own therapist. Sometimes I just talk out loud as if I were with a friend. I do all sorts of things in that time for me that's good for my soul.
Well, I want to talk about that because I know you've been talking more lately about affirmations, and in that time in the shower being able to just look at the mirror and tell yourself that you love yourself and stuff like that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's hard, dude.
I agree, because it's something that I've attempted to start doing on my own, and it's really hard to do affirmations without just feeling stupid, let alone the fact that it feels like it's not doing anything in the moment.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's a part of self-love and self-care that is kind of bastardized, in my opinion. I know people who I would not say that they're good people, and they do daily affirmations. That's what I mean by the bastardization of it. I also do believe in the power of acknowledging, how do I say this in the most eloquent way? Acknowledging who you are, what you possess as a human, and identifying those things. Acknowledging them, speaking to them, giving life to them, just like you would to a friend. You mean
you're good at? Or what do you mean?
Sure. I mean, all of the things, gotcha. Right? Like the way that if one of your friends was like, man, feeling really crappy about this thing. I want to start a podcast, but I don't feel very confident to do it. It would be you saying, you're very confident, or you're very articulate. You have a great voice. This is something you should do because there's a passion in your heart to do it. I literally talk to myself like that sometimes. And I, kind of the mantra that I use is I say my full name, which is Dennis Allen Gable Jr. I say my full name, Dennis Allen Gable Jr. I love you. You're more than enough. You're not too much. I say those are the things I always say. The reason that I say not that you're more than enough and not too much is because I've been accused of the opposite. I've been accused of not being enough, and I've been accused of being way too much. And so those are three things that I have to believe about myself. If I can really love myself and give myself grace, those are three things I have to believe. A, that I love me, that I'm worth loving, especially from me, that I'm not too much, and that I'm more than enough. And then I go into, depending on the day or the time or the week or the month or the feeling or emotion, it's things that I'm good at naturally. So I often tell myself, talk to myself about my creative ability, my ability to be innovative and see ahead of the trend, see things in a different light than I think most people do, identify problems quickly, think of solutions creatively. I identify that a lot. I often talk about how I love other people. I love passionately. I love deeply. I love sort of like all of it abandoned. I'm be all in. Friend, lover, it doesn't matter. Like I can give all that I have to anybody that I love. And that's often one of the things that's too much for people. And so it's identifying in these little ways for me, both what I'm feeling and how I'm experiencing, and then trying to be really true and honest about who I believe I am, what I believe I possess, articulating those, identifying them, and bringing them to light for myself. I don't need anybody else to believe those things. It will be nice, but in my meditation today, what I recognized is that I've lost a lot of myself in my 30s. I got married at 30, became a parent at 30, had my son at 31. When you're in a marriage, like you automatically have to lose part of yourself. My faith, which was something that was very strong in my early 30s, has been totally reframed and rewired and torn down to the floor. Who I am as a creative is different. Who I am as a friend is different. Like I have evolved. I'm a different person now. And what I've come to understand just in the last couple of days, like this is revelations to me, is that I'm not nearly as confident in this version of myself because I don't understand it like I did the other version of myself. And I'm growing in that. And it's tears. And it's really heavy to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, envision the invisible mirror and say, I'm not confident in me right now. And I've always been known as a confident guy. And it's not that I have no self-confidence. It's something that.
Did you call it confidence or not? You're not comfortable in who you are right now?
That's an interesting question because I think I'm more comfortable with who I am now. I don't think I know how to articulate it to the public as well.
I like that answer.
I was pretty good at this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm the best out of all of them. You know what I mean? And so and there's part of it is the illusion is that I didn't really know I wasn't that comfortable with myself then. But I had these foundational things that I knew I could stand on. And now, one of my greatest gifts, I got it out of the womb, is to speak publicly. You could put me on a stage in front of 5,000 people with an impromptu topic, and I'll captivate 4,090 of them. I was born with it, and I don't get to use it. And I used it for a long time. And so that's one thing that it's most of the reason I do a podcast is because it's my stage for some amount of time, but it's different. I don't have the energy. I don't have the feeling, the spirit of people.
You're not feeding off of others.
Right. It's something that I'm creating. And so, even that skill or gift, I don't use. And so it's not something that I can stand on anymore. And it used to be something that I could stand on, something that I could boast about almost.
Like just part of your identity.
It was part of my identity.
I'm the guy who does this. Mm-hmm. And now that you're not the guy who does that, it just gets a little confusing.
Yeah. And like I said, this is all a new revelation for me. But to your question, which was a great question, I'm wildly comfortable with who I am. I'm still finding confidence in that person though.
I think I'm in a similar situation to where for the first time, I think, so mine is, I don't know how to explain it outside of just saying that early on for me, I think the biggest thing was I always just assumed because I was born into the church. During my teen years, I wasn't super active. And then I wanted to be married to my wife, who her and her family were very active. And I was like, all right, I'm going back because I'm not screwing that up. I want to be with her.
Right.
And even when I wasn't active in church, I really did always assume it was true. And I was like, no matter what, I'll come back to it because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. That was just my mindset. In the last few years when I was struggling with do I believe this? It was I always discredited myself to say, you're not smart enough. You researched it. I've never been someone who could quote scripture at you. I could tell you a good majority of the stories that have been told to me. But if you ask me to go find them in the scriptures, it ain't happening. That's just not it's not the way my brain works. It's not where I've put my intention. It's not where I've tried to be. I just haven't, it was never a priority to me. And as I've kind of hit this point where it's like, all right, now that when I started, right before I told my wife, I think it was probably like the few months before that, 3 to 6 months, that I actually had started to decide, like, I really don't think I believe, versus before it was always like, I don't care to be active, but I'm sure it's true.
Right.
And I started to kind of navigate that road of like, all right, I really don't think I believe in it. But when I finally told my wife, like I said, like there was that like 3 months-ish that were like kind of rocky. And since then it's been like nothing but support. And I can't freaking thank her enough, because it's allowed me that space to just like kind of get comfortable where I am. And I mean, this is hands down the most I've talked about it publicly. Like I've kind of mentioned it in previous episodes when I've talked to other people, because I kind of have asked, I think, everyone about spirituality a little bit.
Yeah.
But I've never done like a deep dive like this. And for me, I don't feel like I feel like I'm more comfortable because like anyone I have left to tell, you really don't affect my day-to-day life. You know, like everyone else, you're just going to find out, and like hopefully you see that the same person I was when you thought I was this, and now you knowing that I'm this, still the exact same dude. And I think I was lucky in that I don't think I've ever been someone who got up at church and bore testimony that I know the church is true. I know that God, blah, blah, blah. Like literally anytime I've gotten up and bore my testimony or had to give a talk and then close with testimony, whatever it's been, for me, it has always been, I know that when I'm living the standards of the church, which I still believe in, when I'm a good person and I'm doing, you know, things that make other people's lives better, when I give service, when I do those things, I know that when I'm doing those things, my life just runs better. That has been my simple testimony. And I think the beauty in where I'm at in processing this is I still get to hold on to that.
Right.
I didn't lose that at all. I just lost the foundation of what I was supposed to believe, I guess.
Well, it's not all or nothing.
Well, that's the thing. Like everything's on a spectrum.
Right.
And my brain is very all or nothing. So I did have a little period of like, well, if I don't believe in that, like that's the foundation.
Right.
It's gone. Like it's gone.
Sure.
But it didn't take away my belief that like I do believe there's a higher power. I have no idea how to identify it, talk to you about it. Like I believe there's some reasoning behind this. That's about all I can say. And I know that when I'm being a good person, and like being a good person, not to like say that's why I'm doing this, but like to me, being a good person is taking care of yourself and then doing good for others. Because when you take care of yourself, you're in a position to be there for others.
Right.
And like that, as long as I can hold on to that, I'm good. And I think with you, I see a lot of the same things that I am, where tell me if this is true for you, but like because I've been through all the things I've been through, I feel like Mitch Hancock was a previous episode. He didn't like the word obligated. He's right. I should say I have the privilege of, because I've been through these, I can do this. But like I genuinely feel like an obligation. And if you want to talk about like a spiritual calling, it doesn't come from the church. It just comes from this inner calling that I have. But like I feel the real need to be there for people and to figure out some way that I can have a voice in the world and share my story and share what I've been through, share what I'm going through, and be able to just let people know that they're not alone. Like to me, that has become like, this is my spirituality.
Yeah.
Like this is me saying like, because I believe in this higher purpose, I know that by impacting these people, it'll be like whatever happens next, I'll be taken care of. Like I'm not worried about that.
Right.
I'm trying to build a legacy of knowing that my goal is everyone that I talk to, when they leave that conversation, they're happier, or they feel better about themselves. I suck at that a lot of times. I'm a blunt person, and I'm not articulate, and I'm not always the most friendly. A lot of times I talk with a very straight face, and I may come across as intimidating to some people. But
yeah, because you're a small guy also.
Obviously. But like, that's my thing. Like, this is all stuff that I'm currently developing.
Yeah.
And I totally like asked you a question and then kept talking. But like, where do you feel in terms of the obligation or the privilege to be able to give back and share on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I run Self to Society because I do feel a very deep pull, not pool. There's maybe a deep pool in my heart too, but a deep pull in my heart to be this voice. The one thing that I hear over and over and over, and you've been very gracious to say it to me as well, is like, damn, that was real raw. Like, you really went there with it. And I'm willing. That's probably the greatest gift that I will give to anyone is my willingness. If I'm not willing, you're not going to get it out of me. I'm not going to trick myself into giving somebody something that I'm not really willing to give. If I'm willing to give it though, you'll get all of it. And that is what I feel for me is I'd rather say obligation than calling, to be honest. Like, I hate the word calling. It's weird that I feel that way about it, but my draw to giving back to humanity is 20 minutes at a time on my podcast, and it's the greater version of that is the 47-year-old woman at the gas station who just lost her mom and nobody knows it. I make up scenarios in my head when I meet people that what if this is the worst day this person has experienced in an enormous amount of time? And what if I'm the person who breaks them? Or what if I'm the person who gracefully carries them to tomorrow? And that can be with a smile. It can be with a kind word. Every single time that I order Chipotle, I interact with 3 people. And I ask every single one of them. I say, thanks so much. How are you today? To all 3 people. The person who gets my bowl, the person who puts the salsa in it, or the meat in it, and the person who puts the salsa and cheese in it. Thank you so much. How are you today? You having a good day? How's your shift? You guys are getting slammed. You okay? Every single time. And I don't do it so that I can say it on a podcast. I have a podcast so that I can say things on a podcast.
Yeah.
I do it because it really is, it's my heart for humanity. To be kind and to be full of the grace that I do believe many of the human examples that we've seen in history have carried. And so if I were to take Jesus as my rabbi as an example, it is the way that he gracefully handled the less than people, the people who were hurting, the people who were unassumingly broken, the rich guy who had a broken heart. He had everything he could have wanted. He just didn't know himself well enough. The grace for that guy. That's who I want to be for the world. And I don't need a title to be that person. I thought I did. I thought I had to be called a Christian to be that person. I thought I had to operate under a specific thing to be that person. The best part of my rewiring of faith is the belief that I actually am enough in and of myself to spiritually give something to somebody else. Because if I believe that I'm from the source of all things, at least some element of the DNA of that source is in my being. And that makes it okay for me to be able to give it. The one thing where I really struggled with all of this is giving myself the grace to admit that I might want to come back someday. That's been the hardest challenge. Is me giving myself the grace to say, well, maybe I will do that again. I'll just do it differently. And I'm still not there. Like, I've still made no decisions, but that was the place where I didn't give myself any grace. is because when said I was done, I was like, well, that chapter's over.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and the thing that I think you and I are both not ending on, but where we presently are is like we're just open to whatever.
Yeah.
Which means that also falls in whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like I can't stress enough, I really do, though I have things that I don't like about it, I think spirituality is needed.
Mm-hmm.
I think religion is helpful. I think
that was well said.
People having a place to go and to have community and to learn to be better versions of themselves is so freaking needed in this world right now. There are so many people who feel so alone and don't feel like they have any ability to go and have a friend or have someone to talk to. I think many churches fill that for many people. Having that community and having that support system. When you go into a new community and you move across states, you can show up to church and you have a built-in community.
Yeah,
and
very true.
It's one of those things where like I really think the world needs more of it, honestly. But I'm open to determining or to defining it differently. And I'm kind of at this place where I'm like, I love this element, but I'm just going to take that from you. And that sounds woo-woo as hell, but I like that you do this.
Right.
And I'm going to take that, you know, and like these different things and just truly being okay with saying like, I'm open to whatever. But I truly do, like, I have no ill feelings towards any church. Like, I really, like, do your thing. Like, you have a purpose and you're making a difference. That's all I'm trying to do. And again, like, this is kind of me figuring out what mine is. This is me saying, this is helpful to me. And I think that's one of my only things, like, within churches is I have a hard time asking my questions because then it comes across as messing with someone else's testimony. And not only is it maybe not appropriate at church because the masses don't want to hear it, I truly don't feel it's my place. And like I know like when I record the intro for this episode later, I will have to preface it with, if you don't want to hear this conversation, don't like skip this one. It's not a big deal, you know? And like, I know that'll be part of this because it's just something that like, I don't feel it's my place to impact other people's testimonies. I'm just here to share my journey. And whatever you want to believe, like if you want to learn from what I've experienced, or not even learn, but like if you just want to hear my experience and just take it for what it is, great. If you don't, I'm not offended by you not wanting to be a part of that either.
Right. Well, I mean, the beautiful part about this conversation is, admit it or don't, every human doubts. Every human doubts. There's no need to shame that or hide that. We all doubt. We all doubt everything. We doubt ourselves. We doubt our spouse. We doubt the love we have for our kids. We doubt our abilities. We doubt faith. We doubt God. We doubt our church. We doubt all sorts of things. Doubt is not wrong. It's not bad. I hope that this conversation that you and I have had is encouraging to people to admit that they doubt, see that it's okay, and carry on positively in that journey. Because the shame does not come in doubting. In my story, the shame came in allowing myself to go so far away from who I was. That's where the shame really was. It wasn't in that I doubted, and I didn't become who I was because I left my church or my faith, or I tore it apart. All of that was brewing inside of me already. I just acted out on it. And now I've got a greater sense of self-control and what I want for myself, how I want to feel in the morning, how I want to come across to other people, right? Like it has become much more about me and how I want the world to ingest me, to take me, to understand me, to feel me, to hear me, than it is trying to please that idea, right? I hope that makes sense. I use a lot of words, but that's my spin. I find a lot of hope in doubt. Where the shame is when you allow the doubt to convince you that you're not worthy of still being good, which is part of what happened to me. I allowed my separation from my faith to convince me that I was just a screw up already anyway. So I might as well travel as far down that road as I could. And I traveled pretty damn far down that road. It's taken a lot of rebuilding emotionally and a lot of grace for myself and a lot of acknowledging shame and acknowledging guilt. And I talk about it a ton on the podcast. Like, guilt and shame and overcoming those things is probably the bulk of, it's woven through probably almost every episode somehow, because it's been such a large part of what I've had to overcome and what I believe people aren't willing to share. People will tell the truth, tell facts, will tell that we've done something wrong. What we have a hard time admitting to is that we threw up bile for weeks on end because we're so moved negatively by the guilt or the shame. As an example, that happened to me.
Yeah.
Like, and so, in this conversation, I'm glad that people will listen. It's such a necessary thing, and you're really level-headed, and you are very articulate in how you present where you are, and the most gracious thing that you've done is not demonize the church. We don't need any more church demonization. I did that part too. I've stopped since doing that because it's unnecessary, but you are handling this conversation with yourself and with your spouse and with a community of people that exist in their screen, with grace and with compassion. And, I hope that this is encouraging. I think you're being a really great example of how to deconstruct well, because not everybody does. I'm one of those people. But you're being a really great example of saying there is grace here. And if you're doubting or questioning to the point that you just can't show up like you used to, that's okay. And your story is very evident of that. And I think that having these conversations can help anybody.
Yeah.
From the most devout to the most defiant. I believe it can help everybody. So, I'm honored to had this deep of I haven't talked about religion like this in a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm honored to have been a part of this with you.
Well, I appreciate that. And we'll wrap up on you complimenting me. So that was nice. But I just want to say, genuinely, I just want to acknowledge you for being someone who really, of the people in my bubble, you're one of the people who's really leading the charge on pushing being vulnerable and being open about the fact that life isn't perfect. And I'm a big fan of that. And I don't think everyone has to be public, but I do appreciate some who are. And I think everyone needs to tell someone, but I don't think everyone has to take it public, you know? And
most people shouldn't.
No, well, that's what I say.
I
don't think everyone has to take it public, but I think everyone needs to tell someone what they're going through. Mm-hmm. I think that'd be helpful. And I just want to acknowledge you for being, even though you talk about hard things, you are a force of positivity amongst people who know you. And that's something that I'm striving to become. And I appreciate the way you show up in the world.
Thanks, man. That's very kind of you.
Before I ask my last question, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Social, it's on Instagram. That's about the only place that I do anything of worth. Online, if you go to dennisgable.com, you can find the podcast there. selftosociety.com will take you to the same place. But just Google my name. It'll take you anywhere that you need to go.
Sounds good. And for my last question, what is something you do every day that makes you happy?
It's got to be my personal time that I take. Hot water, steam, sitting in the shower. I don't always sit, but most days I do. It's taking. Life is chaotic, bro. Earlier I was watching a woman just walk. There was one human walking, and it looked like she was walking in slow motion because there was nothing else around. And it was such a beautiful image just of how simple life can be and how chaotic we make it. If the building that she was in front of wasn't there, it'd be a busy street and busy people on the sidewalk. And it's almost like I got to see a layer of life that was refreshing to see just this slow movement. One person walking with nowhere seemingly to be. And so that's what it's done for me, is it's allowed me in the midst of the chaos, whether it's personal, financial, spiritual, relational, any of it, I'm able to every day take a really long, deep breath, acknowledge myself, feel my soul, fuel my soul, and get myself to a place where I want to be who I am in the world. So that's my daily thing, is just acknowledging myself for some amount of time every day, giving myself the grace to show up. Because I assure you that there are episodes of the podcast that I did not want to show up for. And there are moments that I have not wanted to be present and not wanted to be willing. And I don't want it to ever be contrived. I did enough of that while I was in the church, enough of showing up because I had to. Now I am who I am in the world because I want to. And I'm still relearning who that person is. So
very well said, dude. Well, we'll end it on that. I appreciate you being here.
Dude, I'd love it. Thank you very much.
Yep. And everybody else at home, if you've made it this far in, I appreciate you guys. If you have any more questions, thoughts, whatever on this, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Dennis. You can find me on Instagram at thegoodhoff, Hoff. And I appreciate all you guys for being here and being a part of this community. If you want to join an actual Facebook community, we just have a private group. It's called The Good In Today, and we share a lot of just positive things in there. And not all of the conversations are this deep. More so in there, it's about sharing things that'll make you cry in a happy way on Facebook. And it's just a lot of fun. But if you just search The Good In Today, I basically make you just answer 2 questions saying, do you understand that this is a group where we build people up? And do you understand we're not going to talk about politics? If you got those, let me know. So appreciate you guys. Have an awesome day.